Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Twitter space, and special welcome and thanks to Rashid Abdi. I think we can all start now. I'll give the stage to Blaine Mambu. Please proceed.
Welcome everyone to Whole Review's exclusive X Space, featuring Rashid Abdi, one of the leading geopolitical analysts in the Horn of Africa. For those who are unfamiliar with the Horn Review, we are independent think tank, research and publication think tank, founded in 2021. Our work focuses on politics, security, and diplomacy in the Horn of Africa. Today, we are joined by me, Director of Horn Review, Jan Anita Swai, our Deputy Director, and our co-host, Samia Mohammed, she's Advocacy and PR Officer at Horn Review. So we're thrilled to have Rashid with us to discuss the challenges and opportunities surrounding security, governance, and diplomacy in the Horn of Africa, with a particular focus on Ethiopia and Somalia, of course. So thank you, Rashid, for accepting our invitation and for your willingness to share your invaluable insights with us. So before we dive into this important discussion, I'll give the stage to Rashid to say hello to our followers, his followers, to our audience, and then we will, and then Samia will take the stage to proceed with the conversation. Thank you. I hope you enjoy.
Thank you very much, Horn Review and colleagues. Thank you for inviting me. Happy to be here. And look forward to interesting conversation this evening. Thank you very much.
Thanks again, Rashid. So, Samia, please unmute yourself and proceed with the conversation.
Thank you for taking the time to speak with us again, Mr. Rashid Abdi. Well, for starters, my name is Samia Mohammed, and I am the Advocacy and PR Officer at Horn Review, an English news anchor at News Analytica, and a former research intern in the multilateral department at Institute of Foreign Affairs. I am eager to discuss about security challenges and Al-Shabaab with you, and hope we have a fruitful conversation. And I will proceed to our questions.
Thank you very much again. Let me first of all highlight some of the key challenges, security challenges. I think we are likely to face in the coming 1 year. 2025 is likely to be another difficult year in the Horn of Africa, but specifically in Somalia. The very ambitious military operation against Al-Shabaab between August 2020 and August and January 2023 that has stalled, and the campaign against Al-Shabaab has largely become, I think, hugely dysfunctional. Somalia this month is also going to see a major transition in the peacekeeping forces, a drawdown in the African peacekeeping troops, and also a lot of unsettled issues regarding the composition of which forces are going to be part of the peacekeeping duties, which nations will join, which nations will not join. There are also very huge funding issues which have not been resolved regarding this mission. Roughly 12,000 peacekeepers will be managing this very delicate transition in the 1 year. The insurgent group Al-Shabaab remains very active, holds territory, significant territory in south central Somalia. They also are able to exert a lot of influence beyond even areas they do not control. The government still remains weak and unable to exert control over its borders and beyond the capital, Mogadishu. We haven't seen as much terror attacks in the last few months, but that is not an indication that Al-Shabaab is weak. It is probably likely that Al-Shabaab is conserving its energy for the coming 1 year. I think most of the experts we talk to tell us that they are bracing for a new Al-Shabaab offensive. And I think we will likely see more escalation of Al-Shabaab terror attacks inside Somalia. Regionally, it is also likely that Al-Shabaab will expand its operations. We know Al-Shabaab has been saber-rattling against Ethiopia for a while. Recently, they also conducted a border attack, which was quite significant. They committed over 1,500 troops to trying to breach the Ethiopian border. They most likely also would have, I think, infiltrated some of their, operatives in Ethiopia. So the risk is extremely high that Al-Shabaab may be able to carry out significant attacks, not just inside Somalia, but also outside, specifically Ethiopia, because in the last 1 year, Ethiopia has been, of course, much in the news. So overall, I think the security situation remains grim, but I think, I don't want to be over pessimistic. There could be potential that if the tensions between Somalia and Ethiopia is eased, Ethiopian troops are allowed to stay on and manage some of these, border security challenges cooperatively with the Somali National Army and also regional governments. It is very likely that also this would mitigate and ameliorate what is otherwise likely to be a very grim situation. Back to you.
All right, Mr. Rashid Abdi. That was a very insightful analysis of the current political climate. I particularly appreciate your points on Al-Shabaab and the threat level posed by Al-Shabaab across the Horn of Africa. But there's another question, and the other question is, so with Al-Shabaab's increasing adaptability, what innovative approaches are needed to counter their influence? This is the other question that we have that we need you to analyze it for us.
Al-Shabaab remains one of the longest guerrilla insurgencies in the Horn of Africa. It has clocked more than a decade. It is one of the most resilient, one of the most adaptable insurgencies in the Horn. It is also the wealthiest insurgency. Al-Shabaab's revenue generation is now estimated to be roughly around $100 million a year. And that probably is more than what regional, but also the federal government itself can raise. And that tells you significantly that we are not just dealing with an insurgency or an armed group. We are essentially talking about a shadow government, an entrenched bureaucracy, and a very efficient tax and also economic, power in Somalia. It is not easy to dislodge that kind of an insurgency, which is deeply embedded not just in society, but also has deep tentacles in the economy and the political economy of the country. I think definitely there is a need to significantly weaken Al-Shabaab through coordinated military action. And we have seen some hope, I think, when recently, there was a major campaign in South Central Somalia. Clans rose up, supported by the Somali National Army, and we saw a significant rollback of territory against Al-Shabaab. That operation has stalled, And I think we need to pause and also ask ourselves, what are the lessons learned from why we failed? I think one clear lesson from the failure is the fact that the government prioritized speedy, headline grabbing, very good seizure of territory. In other words, they loved, being in the next day's headline that the government has captured this village and that village, and also statistics about the number of villages captured. So these are the kind of, I think, misguided policies we saw, and very little was devoted towards actually holding territory. And in a counterinsurgency, I think it is important not just to invest in clearing forces, but also to invest in holding forces. And this is the weakness of Somalia. We haven't seen capable hold forces in many of the federal member states who are capable of holding territory for a long time. Then, of course, there are other, I think, clearly structural and logistical issues which have not been resolved. And these are perennial issues which ought to have been addressed by now. The other, I think, most important point is that a military struggle has to serve a political end. And you need to devote as much energy into political deal making, political stabilization, as you also put effort in the military campaign. And what we have seen is the government over-investing in the military campaign and under-investing in the political work that was needed. And the situation in Somalia is now much worse than it was under the former president. The government of Puntland has basically cut off relations with the government in Mogadishu. Jubaland has also cut off relations with the government in Mogadishu. So there is a disarray in the federal system. And these are the kind of weaknesses, I think, which Al-Shabaab exploits very effectively. And unless there is, a very strong concerted effort by the government of Somalia to reach out to these, aggrieved regional states to rebuild Somali cohesion, it is very likely that you are not going to defeat Al-Shabaab. I think Al-Shabaab will be degraded when there is a concerted, coordinated, and sustained, relentless action by every party in Somalia. That includes the national governments, but also the subnational governments and the federal member states. So that, I think, so those are some of the, I think, key ways in which you can address the problem of this insurgency. But I don't want, I think, to minimize the kind of unique and deadly insurgency we face in Somalia. Al-Shabaab controls more territory than probably any other guerrilla insurgency in the whole of Africa. It also generates more revenue than any other insurgency in Africa. Has more experience. It is also a learning organization that has built expertise on really lethal attacks, but also maintaining, steadily investing in, improving its technique of warfare. It is now able to manufacture its own IEDs. It is able to, deploy longer range rockets. And that clearly tells me that, it is just a matter of time before also Al-Shabaab gets its hand on more deadlier modern technologies, including drone weaponized technology. So I think those are some of my thoughts on this topic. So back to you.
That was an exceptionally astute analysis of the approaches that are needed to counter the influence. So, how do internal political dynamics within Ethiopia and Somalia affect their ability to manage cross-border security concerns and broader regional stability? What do you have to say about that? Back to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this is a crucial question. And the last 1 year has seen the most dramatic and the most serious tension in bilateral relations between Somalia and Ethiopia since 1977. So that is how serious the situation has been between the two states. And that has had significant, I think, impact on the ability of the two states to cooperate on security matters. Ethiopia is key to maintaining security and stability in the border regions, especially in Hiran, in Gedo, Bay Bakol. These are regions that are very strategic to Ethiopia and historically has also been important for the Ethiopian military. And I think this is a kind of win-win security partnerships that I think is needed. Clans that inhabit these regions are very grateful to the role which the ENDF has played over the years, the sacrifices the ENDF has made to really secure towns like Baidoa, which are major cities, allowing livelihood systems, allowing for a measure of governance to take place, allowing humanitarian corridors for aid delivery. So this has all been, I think, crucial. Now, the last 1 year has seen another element introduced into the relations between the two countries when Ethiopia agreed a memorandum of understanding with Somaliland, which is yet not internationally recognized, but remains a de facto state. That antagonized relations with Mogadishu. Mogadishu elevated the crisis to probably an existential level, and basically said that it is now, the country is now on a war footing with Ethiopia, and this crisis has simmered. In the last, especially towards the closing months of 2024, we saw effort by the government of Turkey to intervene. Turkey is a major player in the Horn of Africa, has a vested interest in the economies of Somalia, but also in the economies of Ethiopia, and was best placed to try to mediate and bring the two parties to the table. And I think the personal intervention of the Turkish president, Erdogan, was quite crucial. A deal of some sort was agreed, which allows probably the Ethiopians to retain their troops in South Central Somalia. And I think a much more deeper discussion between Ethiopia and Somalia on access to the sea. This has been, I think, some of the contentious issues last year. I think 2025 January starts with a glimmer of hope that the Turkish mediation may offer a way out for the parties to reforge their relations, and that will have an impact on security. If Ethiopia and Somalia continue on this path of engagement, direct engagements and dialogue, I know President Erdogan is scheduled to come to the two countries in the coming few weeks. There is potential for a major summit, and also I think a final agreement on how many ENDF troops will be allowed to be deployed to the border. If all those issues are resolved amicably, then I think we are looking at a more better prospects for at least stability of the border security situation. But if, for a variety of reasons, the parties are unable to make an agreement, and then we see probably a reignition of the MOU crisis, then I think this could be even much more dangerous than last year, because, as I said, the bulk of the African troops are actually leaving, and very few will remain now. So those are, I think, some of the points which I wanted to raise in this question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rashid, for your great insights. Hello again, everyone. I am Jalini Tesfai, Deputy Director at Horn Review, and also the co host for today's discussion. We've been having a great discussion thus far. Thank you, Samia. Building on the previous discussion we've been having so far, I'd like to ask Mr. Rashid about your take on the MOU signed between Ethiopia and Somaliland this time last year for Ethiopia to gain sea access for port and naval purposes. And can you also reflect on the developments then onwards, such as Somalia's reaction to the MOU and Eritrea's frustration and Egypt's diplomatic maneuver post the MOU?
Yes, I think we know we have known for a number of years that Ethiopian establishment, the Ethiopian policymakers, basically worry about the future of the country. Ethiopia is a vast country. It has the largest economy in the Horn. It is also a rising population, has a rising population. It is a massive state. And I think it is entirely reliant on Djibouti for the time being. And Djibouti has a lot of its own challenges. And projecting into the future, something like 50, 60 years ahead, policymakers in Ethiopia felt that they can no longer rely on one single access to the sea or one single outlet. And so this is a challenge that has been growing, as an imperative that has been growing within the Ethiopian establishment. And it did not actually start, as many people say, with Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. We know that Meles Zenawi used to talk about this issue of diversifying access away from Djibouti. And we have seen that interest develop over the years. I think what Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed did was to introduce another different element, which is Ethiopia is not just interested in an outlet, or commercial port, but it is also interested in putting some kind of a naval or military outpost on this coastline. So kind of a sovereign access, a negotiated long-term lease. Now, this is not unusual in the world, but it usually happens between countries that are internationally recognized. Now, the challenge is that Ethiopia went ahead and made an agreement with a region, with a state which Somalia considers part of its own region. Now, that posed a challenge internationally because it may be seen as a kind of a breach of international regulations. Somalilanders, on the other hand, say that they have been a de facto state over 30 years, a de facto state. They have full sovereignty over their borders and territory and coastline. And also Somalilanders specifically say that they did not, they have just reclaimed an independence that they had. And this is a historical debate which goes back to what happened in 1960 when Somaliland gained independence first and then joined with the Somali Union. It is a very complex and emotive topic. And so it was a powder keg. And I think immediately Ethiopia reached this deal. It triggered a major crisis. Internationally also there was, I think, a bit of unease about the prospects of what would happen. The Somali government also cleverly exploited the MOU by threatening that this will revive Al-Shabaab, this will allow Al-Shabaab to recruit. This would be immensely destabilizing for Somalia's state building. And I think many of the international partners of Somalia went along with this argument and accepted that it was destabilizing. And so we saw huge pressure placed on Ethiopia to walk back from the MOU. Let me stress here that Ethiopia up to today has not formally, categorically renounced the MOU. So technically the MOU is still on the table. But what I think Ethiopia has done is to reach back to Somalia and say that we need to at least work together to allow a smooth transition towards the new mission called AUSSOM or AWESOM. And I think that is some of the calculations that is also driving Ethiopia towards Somalia at the moment. Now, other external actors definitely also spotted an opportunity with the crisis. And Egypt, in particular, we saw also scale up its engagement in Somalia in the last 1 year, coinciding with the issue of the MOU. Now, Egypt protested against the MOU for two reasons. One, of course, is that they have been long supporters of Somalia's unity and one Somalia policy. Then also the other is that Ethiopia wanted to have a footprint on the coast, on the Red Sea coast, and this is a backyard. This is a region, a waterway which Egypt considers its own backyard and sees as a direct strategic threat if Ethiopia gains some kind of a military outlet on the Red Sea coast. Eritrea too has not been happy because it will also see that as a direct challenge. So we saw this alliance very quickly emerge between Somalia, Eritrea, and Egypt, and I think there was a lot of warnings by multiple actors that we are heading towards a conflict, and unless there is de-escalation, things were looking very grim last year. So I'm grateful that at least this Turkish mediation has to some extent reduced the heat and the tensions that have been generated. But as I said, there are other parties who definitely are not happy with the current easing of tensions between Addis Ababa and Mogadishu. And I think Egypt in particular will try hard to try to, first of all, I think, undermine the Ankara declaration, but also to also divide Somalis. So that also is another, I think, risk. Now, Egypt is not just interested in taking advantage of this Somali situation, but also has its own long-running, protracted, unresolved issue with Ethiopia regarding the Grand Renaissance Dam. The Grand Renaissance Dam issue, has been resolved in a way that largely favors Ethiopia. Ethiopia recently is a number of is among a number of Nile Basin states that have also agreed a new framework for cooperation, largely to, I think, neuter the old colonial treaty which favored Egypt. So in many ways, Egypt's maneuvers stems from, I think, a realization that it is now strategically much more weakened in terms of bargaining with Ethiopia. Back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rashid. That's a very great insight. Let me move to the next question. How significant was the Turkey-brokered agreement in easing tensions between Ethiopia and Somalia? I mean, with the tripartite alliance between Somalia, Eritrea, and Egypt, and also Somalia's push for the withdrawal of Ethiopian troops from AU-led peacekeeping operations. The tension was obviously at an all-time high, but now we are observing Ethiopian and Somalia authorities and also senior diplomatic and military officials actively engaging each other. So, how significant do you think the Ankara Declaration is?
I think that there is no doubt that Turkey wields extraordinary influence in the Horn. It is the single largest, most influential actor in Somalia. It has significant leverage in Ethiopia. It's roughly estimated that the foreign direct investment from Turkey is roughly around $8 billion in Ethiopia alone. Over dozens, over 200 companies operate in Ethiopia, hiring tens of thousands of Ethiopians. Ethiopia buys high-end military equipment, including drones from Turkey. So Turkey needs access to this large market, and I think wants to maintain this lucrative commercial and military partnership with Ethiopia. At the same time, it does not, I think, want to lose Somalia, and sees a lot of promise in Somalia. Right now, the Egyptian Navy, the Turkish Navy is along the Somaliland coast, is Somalia coast, involved in protecting, exploration, oil and gas exploration work, which is going on there. So Turkey has a lot of ambitions in Somalia, but also wants to maintain its leverage in Ethiopia. So that gives it, I think, unique opportunity to continue to act to mediate. Now, I don't want to oversell the importance of this relationship, but just to say that for the moment, Turkey is a key player, and if Ethiopia and Somalia continue to believe that Turkey is a neutral actor, is a credible mediator, then there is a good chance that will succeed. Now, as I said, there are also other actors who are not happy with what the Turks are doing and will seek to undermine it. So there will be a lot of pressure, I think, on the Turks to really come up with a very good mediation strategy, but also to keep the parties to the table and to pressure them when necessary. I think the Turks are experienced diplomatic players internationally, and the fact that they are sending, their president into the Horn in a couple of weeks tells me that they really know that this is a high stakes game, and they need to be putting a lot of pressure on the parties. I am optimistic that Somalia and Ethiopia will probably find an amicable, workable solution on the issue of troop contribution. The challenge, I think, in the long term will be how the issue of the MOU with Somaliland is resolved. That is probably a different topic, but I think it is definitely also one of the issues that will continue to, I think, complicate relations between Mogadishu and Addis Ababa. Back to you.
Thank you again, Mr. Rashid. Before going to my next question, I would like to kindly ask our listeners here to follow Hard Review's Twitter page, and thank you in advance for your support. Going to our next question, Mr. Rashid, building on the thought you've been discussing, I would like to ask you, what does Turkey's increasing influence in the region mean for global powers, such as Israel, and how do UAE's partnerships with Ethiopia and Somaliland alter regional dynamics?
Yeah. Turkey is a very assertive geopolitical power in the Middle East. Turkey is located in a region which basically divides Europe, Asia, but also the Middle East. So it is a very strategic country. It is a NATO member. It is also a major scientific and military power. And also we have seen how Turkish drones are now very much part of Turkey's overall projection of power, but also diplomacy. Turkey also has a very long imperial history. We remember the history when Turkey was an imperial system, the Ottoman imperial system. And many of these regions where Turkey is projecting power were all Ottoman colonies, North Africa, but also parts of the Horn and the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden and the Indian Ocean. These are terrain which are well known to the Ottomans. And we see, that the government of Erdogan actually overemphasize this, I think, imperial history, but also, in many ways, Erdogan projecting himself as the new the new emperor or the new caliph of the Ottoman Empire, trying to rebuild a new sphere of influence over the old sphere of influence of the Ottoman Caliphate. So that, I think, has really generated also tensions with countries. Recently, we saw Turkey bankroll an insurgency in Syria, which has taken over the state of Syria, and that has, for the first time, brought Turkish influence very close to the border with Israel. Israeli, experts envisage some kind of a future conflict scenario with Turkey, and I think are probably preparing for that. So Turkey is really aggressively building up its military might, but also flexing its muscles everywhere, and that worries me a great deal because in the roughly 20 minutes of my discussion, I was talking about how Turkish investment in really peace diplomacy can actually yield some positive results. But I think there is another darker side to this Turkish projection of power, which is the over-militarization. And that could probably cause Turkey to overplay its hand, overreach, and then go into conflict with states. The likely conflict scenario will probably be, with Israel, especially if the tensions in Syria is unresolved. The likelihood of proxy conflicts is very high also in the Horn of Africa, but also North Africa. It is important, I think, that one of the Mediterranean states, which actually is very close to Turkey, is Egypt. Egypt has had very strained relations with Turkey for a number of years over a variety of issues, including the role of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egyptian politics. That issue has not been resolved. Recent months, there have been easing of tensions between Cairo and Ankara, but that tension is rapidly building up because of what's happening in Somalia and also Ethiopia, where Egypt feels that it is being pushed to the side by Turkey's new diplomacy. Back to you.
Thank you, Rashid. I think you've touched on a very crucial point. Let me just say this. Now, this might be a very tough question, but will Ethiopia recognize Somaliland? And what would that mean for the future of the Ankara Declaration and, of course, for regional security, given the predictability of Somalia's response?
Yes, that will be a very tough question, and I don't have an answer for it. I think it is quite conceivable that the current situation will prevail. Ethiopia will continue to have this special relationship with Hargeisa without actually going as far as recognition, because this year is going to be very delicate, and they probably need stability along the border. But that is just my own speculation. The window probably for recognition has now slightly passed. There could be prospects, of course, if you have a more greater investment in Somaliland by the Americans with an incoming Trump government. But I suspect that Ethiopia is now much more invested in really stabilizing its relations with Somalia than actually proceeding with the implementation of the MOU. I don't want to say the MOU issue is dead or that Ethiopia is not going to recognize Somaliland, but it is certainly not unlikely to be this year. Back to you.
Thank you again. On a related note, what's your take on this issue? Is it likely that the Trump presidency would recognize Somaliland? And what would be the broader implications for regional stability and US Somalia relations, thereby for the counterterrorism operations in Somalia?
Yes, I think that is the question which everybody is asking. The Trump in the White House can be quite unpredictable, and it's very difficult to know what will happen. Now, one of the reasons why I think we have seen a lot of speculation about the potential for the United States government recognizing Somaliland is a policy document called Agenda 2025, I think, which was put together as a kind of a policy blueprint for the new president, Donald Trump. Now, Trump himself has distanced himself from that document. So it is very unlikely that that document expressly calls on the U.S. government to recognize Somaliland. It is quite likely that he may not proceed in that direction. However, because there are also very influential forces within the political system in the U.S. who are calling for at least increased engagement, we will see probably more more push in that direction, more closer cooperation between Somaliland, more direct military engagement, especially the potential for the United States Pentagon or military to establish some kind of a footprint on the Gulf of Aden coastline, on the Somaliland coast. So those are all prospects, especially given the fact that also the UAE is very much closely also allied with the US. Those are prospects. I don't anticipate a speedy rush by the US to recognize Somaliland, largely because also Somalia is a member now of the UN Security Council and has a 2-year mandate, and that makes it, I think, slightly awkward for the host country, which is the United States. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rashid. That was a very truly insightful analysis. And again, this is Samia Mohammed, your co-host and advocacy and PR officer at Horn Review. As I proceed to this question arises as to how can both Ethiopia and Somalia avoid potential pitfalls while strengthening security ties without triggering Somaliland, and of course, other regional rivalries like Eritrea and Egypt? Back to you.
Yeah, I think that is a good question, and we live in a region which also is highly unstable, prone to conflicts, and also where I think where the multilateral systems of negotiations, diplomacy, and peace building, all these mechanisms, I think, are definitely now much more weaker than they were. So we need to see more, I think, action, especially by regional organizations like IGAD, to invest in, not just firefighting or crisis diplomacy, but also in more longer term, strategic peace and security diplomacy in the Horn of Africa. And so there are no easy, I think, answers here. Definitely governments have to resist, I think, militarizing, first of all, diplomacy, seek dialogue and seek negotiations, but also seek beneficial cooperation. I think there is definitely a room for integration of economies, but I think we need also to be creative and look at the longer term crisis. Somaliland, the issue of Somaliland will not have been crisis if the region had shown greater leadership, if the AU and IGAD had shown greater leadership. The crisis over Somaliland's sovereignty will need to be resolved sooner or later. And I think more special emphasis should go towards the regional states to come together and agree a pathway. The current government in Somaliland definitely wants this type of regional kind of a negotiated path. And I hope they will push in that direction. Of course, it is the sovereign right of Ethiopia, if it wants to recognize Somaliland, to do that. I'm sure after the last 1 year, they would probably be much more careful in how they do that. Ultimately, it is also a question for Somalis to definitely sit down and resolve this long simmering problem. I do not want to preempt what the solution would look like, but countries are able to resolve this if they work honestly and sit down seriously and negotiate together. It is impossible for Somalia to impose forcefully unity. And I think that is one issue which probably Mogadishu ought to abandon. And so Somaliland can sit down and negotiate without actually having a clear red line. So each party must also be flexible on what kind of a solution will look like. I don't know whether I'm communicating any clear picture on that issue. All I'm saying, I think, is that the Somaliland crisis is not going to go away, even if Ethiopia does not go ahead without recognizing Somaliland this year. This crisis is now more urgent than ever. It is feeding geopolitical tensions everywhere and needs to be resolved, but resolved in a concerted, strategic way, without harming, I think, established alliances and relations. So that is, I think, how I would probably answer that question. Back to you.
Well, Mr. Rashid, thank you for those insightful remarks. And as I move forward, one might ask that what are the implications of Egypt's troop deployment in Somalia for Ethiopia's strategic interests in the region and the broader horn of Africa's security architecture? And how can Ethiopia effectively counter Egypt's influence and military presence on its doorstep? Back to you.
I think if Egypt continues insisting that it needs some kind of a military footprint in Somalia to deploy boots and to become parts of AUSSOM or AUSOM, that will definitely, I think, be a recipe for disaster and crisis. I have argued for a long time that Egypt has no business in really becoming party to the peacekeeping. There are already regional forces who are competent, capable, and I think introducing Egyptian military presence is actually complicating the picture, antagonizing Ethiopia. One of the reasons why Ethiopia wants to be part of AUSOM is specifically to keep Egypt out. Because if Egypt deploys troops to Somalia, that will be a declaration of war as far as I think Addis Ababa is concerned. So from, I think, a peace diplomatic perspective, that is something you do not need. And I think there has been a lot of pressure put on Cairo in recent months to walk back from that decision. I am not sure that actually Cairo is listening. There are also elements within Mogadishu who seem to believe that playing this divisive, game of playing one party against another, playing off Egypt against Ethiopia, is going to pay off and somehow going to boost Somalia's position. I think that is, a very stupid, calculation. You do not need to compound Somalia's messy crisis. What you need is actually a competent peacekeeping force able to continue at least some progress on the ground. If you introduce Egyptian military presence into Somali conflict or Somalia's political situation, it will be, I think, combustible. It's simply pouring fuel into fire. So I will really dissuade Cairo to really reconsider that. And I will also implore the African Union because the African Union is part of the crisis. They went and I think initially signaled to Egypt that they will be allowed into this peacekeeping force. The peacekeeping mission in Somalia is already crowded. You do not need another extra actor. What you need is actually ways of finding, reducing, first of all, the number of troops who are on the ground, but then also investing cleverly in Somali security structure itself, so that the Somali National Army will progressively be able to take responsibility for its own security into the future. Somalia, a Somalia which is strong, which is able to secure its own borders, is actually, I think, the goal of everyone. And I think that should be the priority also of regional states, to enable Somalia to stand up on its feet and defeat Al-Shabaab. Back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Rashid. Well, your arguments are well constructed and powerful, persuasive as well. And proceeding, the other question that we have is, how does Eritrea's regional isolation, militarized governance, and its complex relationship with its neighbors influence its role in the Horn of Africa's security and diplomatic landscape? And what future do you think there is for Eritrean relationship? Back to you.
Yes, relations between Ethiopia and Eritrea have been going up and down over the years. I think we saw very close cooperation between Addis and Asmara during the Tigray War, and things started, I think, falling apart after the end of that war. Eritrea was not happy with the peace treaty, wanted Prime Minister Abiy and the Ethiopian government to prosecute the war to the finish. That did not happen. That, I think, is probably one of the reasons why the two states fell apart. Eritrea is probably part of the Horn of Africa. It is not, an external actor or party. At the moment, it has a very difficult government. It has, difficult relations with all its neighbors. But I think one must be careful against seeing Eritrea as an existential threat. It is not an existential threat. And I think just looking in the longer term, there is a need for a much more greater investment in peace diplomacy and outreach towards Eritrea, to bring it back from the fold, and also to bring it into the fold, but also to work out some of those unresolved issues of grievance, especially with border. Ethiopia and Eritrea have not had a conclusive final agreement to their border dispute, and I think they need to do that at some point. A clear, transparent settlement of that border conflict will go a long way in boosting confidence. Then I think Eritrea must also realize that it cannot impose its will on regional states, and that, I think, requires probably a generational change, much more a different kind of a generational change. I don't know, but I think all I'm saying is that everyone has a role to play in really bringing down the tensions in the Horn of Africa. Eritrea definitely, has to be pressure has to be put on Eritrea to rebuild its relations with the regional states. And I hope that at some point there will be initiatives both by Ethiopia but also by regional countries with clout, especially Kenya, to try to bring some kind of a grand regional settlement to some of these very vexed, geopolitical unresolved tensions. Back to you.
Great, thank you. Let's shift our focus for a moment now and discuss how do conflicts and political instability in the Middle East and Gulf region influence security, economic interdependence, and geopolitical alignments in the Horn of Africa and also beyond.
Yeah, that's a huge. I don't know how to deconstruct that question. It's quite massive, but yes, I think what we have seen in the last few, at least the last 2 decades, is a steady rise in the number of external Middle Eastern actors with interest in the Horn of Africa, but also in the Red Sea arena. Greater economic resources being put into regional governments, greater investment coming in from the Gulf. The UAE, for example, is now the only country that has built an entire African coastline, starting from Saila up to Maputo. That is a large stretch of territory. And only one single actor, DP World, has managed to acquire that. So Gulf and Arab money is significantly altering the economies of the Horn. It is also the middle players, or the so-called middle powers, are investing also in the longer term. And slowly we are seeing also the power balance shift. These powers are now much more influential in our politics than actually the old Western powers. In other words, Turkey is today much more influential in Somalia than probably a country like the United States. And that tells you a great deal about how the world has changed significantly in the last few years. So looking into the future, I think there's no doubt in my mind that the middle powers will remain the most significant geopolitical and geoeconomic players in the Horn of Africa, but also in the greater Horn of Africa. Now, this also creates its own imbalance. It creates its own tensions, and countries in the region are weak. Some of them are highly unstable. So we do not have, I think, a collective bargaining power of how to maneuver and how to, I think, get better terms for this new relationship which is being forged. I think IGAD will be probably leading, or ought to lead, that strategic thinking about how to, position the Horn of Africa in such a way that it's not just a victim. It can actually sit down with some of these new actors and players and extract better terms for its, I think, economic partnerships, but also push back against some of the unhelpful political meddling, and especially the issue of fueling proxy conflicts. We know that some of these actors have become deeply involved in proxy conflicts in the Horn of Africa, and in particular in the conflict in Sudan. And I think this is an area where IGAD can actually stand very robustly and say, we need to be talking very hard when you new actors are putting a lot of weapons into a conflict scenario like Sudan. The United States has just categorized one of the actors as supporters of genocide in Sudan, and that, I think, is a clear, definitely warning. And the crisis in Sudan is also tragic and heartbreaking, and just shows to you the potential for conflict that the new, I think, geopolitical wave is also creating in the Horn of Africa. So overall, I think there are benefits, but also there are highly risks. There are risks, and I think the challenge for us is to try to find mechanisms for collective bargaining, but also collective action to, I think, protect our interests. Back to you.
Great, thank you. Now, let me challenge your thoughts, Mr. Rashid, with this question. Sorry. Do you think external players like Turkey, the US, or the EU are striking the right balance in supporting regional security efforts?
We definitely live in an age where I think there is a proliferation of conflict and crisis all over the world. Multilateral systems of diplomacy, structures, normative values, all of these are becoming significantly undermined. So I wouldn't be surprised that all these actors, everybody, I think, is fumbling or scrambling for some kind of a response. So definitely, I think the onus is on African Union, but also on regional, structures to find ways and mechanisms for addressing these serious challenges which we all face. There's nobody who I can say is really now acting. We have seen a lot of confusion by other external players as well in trying to mitigate. Definitely, I think no single region can resolve its own problems, because modern conflicts are driven by geopolitical competition and on a global scale. So no one single actor can really resolve issues. There's, of course, a very popular African saying that we have African solutions to African problems. It is good that but it's not largely effective. We need to be building, I think, regional alliances as well for stabilization. And if you have actors, let's say the European Union or the United States, who are able to support a kind of a de-escalation in the Horn of Africa, or new initiatives to bring about peace between Eritrea and Ethiopia, those are kind of efforts I think we need to be promoting. In other words, no single region or single state is able to resolve these huge challenges, because they have global connections, and also there are other external dynamics which also factor into this crisis. So the AU, the United Nations, global blocks, definitely have a role in playing this together. I think, but we definitely need to be the one who are leading that conversation. I'm all in favor for IGAD to be playing a more proactive role. IGAD was specifically created, I think, for these type of situations, to be the preeminent agency for conflict resolution and conflict prevention. And that is a role I would expect IGAD to be well equipped to do. And also there's definitely be a room for public people, ordinary people like me and you, to be demanding of our governments to invest more in these institutions of multilateral diplomacy. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rashid Abdi, for sharing your valuable insights with us today. Before we conclude our discussions, is there any final thoughts or message you'd like to leave with our audience?
No, I'm grateful to you, to the Horn of Review for this special, I think, forum today. I really enjoyed it, and I hope if there is one thought I leave with you, it is that we can be masters of our own destiny. We need to invest more in our own structures of peace and security and diplomacy, without also cutting ourselves from the outside world. In other words, we also form more clever strategic partnerships in order to resolve some of these challenges. 2025, there is no certainty, is going to be a very difficult year in Somalia, but also the wider region, but also globally, with new changes in Washington and other tensions globally rising. So we need to be also watching very closely what happens, and also be very quick on our feet to really put out small fires, and also to be more proactive in addressing some of the longer term challenges. Thank you very much, and good evening.
Thank you again, Mr. Rashid, and also special thanks to our listeners here for your time. I think we have had a great discussion today, and with that, I will now hand it over to Blaine Mamu to close the discussion and for a closing remark. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jalani. Thank you, Samia. And of course, thank you, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today and for your patience throughout. This has been an incredibly insightful and engaging session. Rashid, we deeply appreciate your expert analysis and the light you've shed on some of the most critical issues shaping not just the present but also the future of the Horn of Africa. So we look forward to hosting more spaces with you and continuing these important discussions. So that concludes our session for today. Thank you once again, and good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you very much, Blaine. Bye-bye.
Bye.